Okay, video for year 2 forensics. So this is to go alongside the checklist I've done for you. Make sure it's the updated one with the colours on. Okay, so if you look at the first page, it talks about carrying out and outlining chemical techniques. So we've got 3 chemical examinations. So the first one we've got here, the ink chromatography from the writing on the ransom note envelope. Okay, so obviously you've got to outline the process of paper chromatography. That's fairly easy, and show that you've carried out the practicals for that. Comparison of the samples with sample X from your crime scene. Okay, then we also did an anhydrine on the note that was found inside, and again outline and carry out. And then I've done you a video for a drugs packet which we found in the car that was stolen. I'll get back to that in a minute. And then I showed you 5 chromatograms for GCMS to compare to your 5 suspects that you've got the names of. Okay, so those are your 3 chemical examinations. So for the pass, you're outlining and carry out on your checklist. Then you do the next task for the merit, and then the distinction, all for these 3 examinations. Okay, next I've got physical. So this one is from the original crime scene burglary. So remember, it was a restaurant burglary, was the scenario I gave you, where car keys were stolen, and then the offender took off in the vehicle. So in that restaurant, we had a footwear mark on the floor, which you have looked at. We had a fingerprint lift from the glass bottle that was on the bar that we believe a male was drinking from. And you looked at the handwriting from the outside of the envelope. So the envelope was handwritten, whereas the ransom note was cut and stick from a magazine. And you had a look at the handwriting samples with 5 London letters. Okay, biological. So for this one, these are the ones we didn't obviously get to. So what I've decided to do is to take the stamp from the envelope, from the ransom note, and that will be sent for DNA testing. Also from your vehicle that you would have examined for your collision investigation, we've got drinks bottles, because I believe there's an alcohol content question. So there's an alcohol bottle in the recovered stolen car. So obviously the car that was stolen from the restaurant burglary, which supposedly was used to kidnap Molly, which I'll go into now. So there was an alcohol bottle. You swabbed the neck of the drinks bottle, so we'll get a DNA hit for that. And also there was blood in the boot of the recovered car. Okay, so I'm going to start writing on the results. Okay, so the blood from the boot of the car came back to Molly. Okay, so we got a DNA hit for Molly. The swabs from the drinks can or drinks bottle came back to Jack the Hat. The stamp from the envelope was Cat the Knife. Okay, so this, when you're writing your conclusions, remember they only have to be short. So you've got your swab, I would say, that you've taken from the boot of the car. You've sent that off for testing, and that was a worthwhile test because it comes back to your kidnapped girl, Molly. So she has had contact with that car. You can't say probably any more than that. You wouldn't want to go any further than that. But she has definitely had contact with that car, or her blood has somehow been transferred into that car. So there is a alcohol bottle, I think it was sort of front passenger footwell, that comes back to Jack the Hat. So you can't say that he was driving, but you can say that he at some point was in the car, or because it's a movable item, a drinks bottle that has Jack the Hat's DNA was found in the front passenger footwell of the vehicle. Okay, so be careful with what you say. Don't make any conclusions that you can't back up. There's only certain things you can link together. The stamp from the envelope from the ransom note. So Cat the Knife's DNA was found on the stamp from the envelope. We'll do chemical next. So the ink chromatography, again, I believe came back to Cat the Knife. So that matches the envelope, the stamp from the envelope. Okay, so that you could link those two together in your conclusions. That there is evidence that Cat the Knife has written, because it comes back. Your handwriting was also Cat the Knife, I believe. If you look back through your notes, when you did your handwriting analysis with your London letters, I believe it came back to Cat the Knife. Okay, so let's link them together. So stamp from the envelope, handwriting from the outside of the ransom note, and the ink. So Cat the Knife has been involved in writing the ransom note envelope, putting a stamp on the envelope, licking the stamp, and the pen that wrote the envelope was found on the suspect, Cat the Knife. Okay, so there's a good link there that she has been involved in the ransom note only at this stage. Okay, so be careful not to say that she has kidnapped Molly, because at the moment she's only involved in writing the ransom note. Okay, right, so did we finish biological? We did. Let's have a look. So let's finish chemical first before we go on to physical. So we've got Cat the Knife for the chromatography. The drugs packet, I think that came back to Cat the Knife as well. Check it. But from my memory, that came back to Cat the Knife. So she has been in the vehicle. It's in the car. She's been in the vehicle and she's a drug taker, basically. So her packet of drugs found on her when she was arrested matches that found in the car. So again, you can't say she's been involved in the kidnapping, but it appears she has been in the car, or drugs from her, if she's a dealer, have been found in the car. Okay, so again, can't say she's involved, but there are mounting links to this crime. The ninhydra in the handprint again was Molly. So it could be that they forced her hand on the ransom note, sort of put it down to show that they have her, to obviously add impact to the ransom note to gain the money. So Molly's handprint, Cat the Knife wrote it and is either a drug dealer, drug taker. So drug dealer, somebody has been in the car that she's dealt to, or she has been in the car. So there's two scenarios for that one. So footwear mark. The footwear mark from the scene was Jack the Hat. So if you, again, look through your analyses, I believe it came back from Jack the Hat. I believe also the fingerprint came from Jack the Hat. We've done that one. Okay, so from here, so at the burglary, we can place Jack the Hat at the restaurant because the footwear mark obviously is not movable. It's on the floor. So he or his shoes, so the shoes taken off him upon arrest, match the footwear mark on the floor in the restaurant. So you've got a scene to person match there. Again, we can't say he kidnapped Molly, but we can say he was in the restaurant at the time that the car keys were stolen. Fingerprint lift on the bottle. So he was sitting at the bar, was handed a glass bottle. That was tested and came back to his fingerprint. So we've got evidence he was at the crime scene where the car keys were stolen. But we can't say any more than that, really. The only other one that came back to Jack the Hat was the drinks bottle in the car. So, again, it's a movable item. So not as good as if we had, say, a fingerprint in the car. We have a drinks bottle in the car. So he or somebody he has had contact with and the alcohol bottle has been transferred to the vehicle. So it could be that Jack the Hat is in the vehicle. You could say, in my expert opinion, I believe this suggests that Jack the Hat and Cat the Knife have been in the vehicle. Okay, but I wouldn't go any further than that. All right. So, I mean, you're probably building up some sort of picture. So, Molly has been kidnapped. Her handprint was on the ransom note, and her blood was in the boot of the vehicle that you've then possibly, not solidly, but possibly linked Jack the Hat and Cat the Knife to. So her blood is in the boot of the car that you've got a drinks bottle and some drugs. Okay, so not solid, not amazing, unmovable evidence, but it's there. Then you've got the ransom note, so the kidnapped girl on the ransom note, and Cat the Knife has written the envelope and has licked the stamp. So you've got kind of a link between, there's nothing for any other suspects. So any other of your 5 suspects, basically the other 3 you can say have no involvement. You found no evidence to link them to the crime scene. The evidence you have are for Jack the Hat, who was at the original burglary, and perhaps Cat the Knife doing the ransom note. Okay. But the blood in the boot is key and worth sending off because you've got to justify your decisions. So definitely worth sending off the stamp from the envelope, because handwriting notoriously isn't wholly reliable and has actually been pretty much eradicated now. It isn't used barely at all and is not highly thought of in court, I would say. So it was absolutely important that the stamp went off for DNA, because DNA is a much more solid match than the handwriting would have been. Okay, so without the DNA, I would say the handwriting was dodgy. Okay, to include Cat the Knife on the ransom note, you really needed this DNA. Okay. But we haven't linked her, apart from the drugs packet. It's a kind of situational link to the car. Okay, whereas Jack the Hat, obviously you've got the car keys were stolen in this burglary above here. So the car keys were stolen here where Jack the Hat was involved, and he's got a drinks bottle in the car. So there's a fairly good link there. So you've got a fingerprint, a footwear mark, and DNA. So you've got 3 things. It's not very careful. 3 things that point towards Jack the Hat that not only link the burglary and the car, but to Molly as well. So I would say the evidence for Jack the Hat is a lot stronger because of these links. Cat the Knife appears to have kept a bit of a distance. Obviously writing the ransom note, trying to get the money, possibly for a drugs habit. But Jack the Hat does have this link here where he's in the car at the burglary where the car was stolen, and Molly has been in the car. Okay. So those are the 9 pieces of evidence we've got, okay, and who they match. And you can see how they all link together, and hopefully you're forming conclusions about which one's the strongest, how you can link the 2 people plus Molly to the scenes, to the 2 scenes. So the 3 scenes, you've got the burglary, you've got the vehicle itself, and the ransom note to the house, because the ransom note was delivered to the house. So I think that's everything. So hopefully you've got enough, and we've done enough work for you to cover these 9. I'm just having a look at them, making sure there's nothing else we needed. The only thing I will mention, because we didn't get to DNA evidence. Okay, so DNA evidence cannot be, and the blood actually. DNA evidence cannot be sole evidence in court, okay, because it is fallible. Although there is some argument now that fingerprints are also fallible, because fingerprints are sort of 1 in a billion. There are obviously sort of 6, 7 other people in the world that would have it's the other way around, really, isn't it? So the fingerprints, it's the same, but fingerprints are more individual. Okay, so with DNA, they only check 12, last time I checked, 12 alleles. Okay, so that's 12 points on the DNA plus whether they're a male or female. So plus XY or XX. Okay. And because they only test these 12, so they only test at certain locations, loci. Okay. So they only test, they don't test the whole DNA, the whole genome of that person. They only test these particular locations and are looking for short tandem repeats, STRs, at these locations. So what they'll do is zoom in on these locations and look at the numbers of repeats. Okay, so obviously you've got 2 chromosomes from your parents. So you may have at the first loci, you may have 8, 12. You've got 8 repeats on one chromosome from dad, say, and you've got 12 repeats on your chromosome from mum. At the next loci, it could be 6, 2, etc., all the way down. And then at the bottom, you'll have an XY or an XX for male or female. Okay, so similar to the fingerprints, but DNA particularly has this fallibility and disbelief kind of to it because people don't fully understand it. A jury particularly, often made up of lay people, don't understand the science. So it is very, some people can rely on it too heavily when actually you are only testing these 12 locations in your genome. Okay, and looking for the repeats. So when it says that there's a hit is 1 in a billion, say, that means that there are 6 or 7 other people in the world that would have these same numbers at the 12 locations and also be a male or female, depending on which hit you got. So if you got your hit to Jack the Hat, we're saying that there are 6 other males in the world that have those same repeats. So rightfully, you should track down all 6 of them and find out if they have an alibi, basically, if they were at another location and can be discounted. So without doing that, the evidence is fallible. There is fault in it. It's not wholly reliable. Okay, because there is this possibility that there are other people in the world that would match this DNA you've taken from the crime scene. So you would have to go and track them down. Okay. Fingerprints are individual to a person. There is still a possibility that there could be somebody in the world, but it's a lot less of a chance. Yeah, a lot smaller chance that you would find somebody else in the world. I mean, you would have to, again, you'd have to go and test every other single person in the whole world to see if your fingerprint is similar to any of them. So it is all based on kind of statistics and probability. So it's all maths, I'm afraid. But the fingerprint is more reliable statistically than a DNA hit. So when I think further down in the merit and the distinction, it asks you for the fallibility of DNA evidence. So you've talked about justifying why you've sent off the DNA evidence. Obviously, the drinks bottle from the scene, drinks bottle from the car, was important because as yet we hadn't linked Jack the Hat to the car. We'd only linked him to the original crime scene. Whereas this links into the car. So that was important to pay for because remember that's external, so that has to be paid for. This is internal and this is internal, although this still has to be maintained. So this footwear mark database, somebody has to be working on that, and that has to be a national database where everybody can dip in and add their samples and it be edited constantly. So it is a cost to maintain a database, as is a DNA database. Okay, but that doesn't cost to test just for the database. This costs for the database to be maintained and then you need to pay for the test itself. Okay, so 2 costs there, only 1 cost there, because an in-house police staff would look at that footwear mark. Same as the fingerprints. It costs to maintain the database, and everybody has to be a part of it, but it doesn't cost, because it's in-house, to examine the fingerprint. This has to be sent to an external lab, this has to be sent to an external lab, and so does this. So biological is usually quite expensive. It can be, especially for a comparison. DNA database, if you're sending it to the database, i.e. you're sending it off blind and seeing if a hit pings up, so if the person has been arrested before. So Jack the Hat has been arrested before, so has Cat the Knife, and oddly enough, so has Molly. I forgot to mention that too. So Molly's fingerprint came up originally on the Ninhydrin because she has been arrested before for drugs. Okay, so there is some thought that this is a drugs debt that they have taken Molly for, either for her partner or for herself. Okay, so Molly's been arrested before, so her fingerprints are on the database. Cat the Knife has been arrested before for drugs. Jack the Hat, I think, had a series of offences he'd been involved in, but remember, the court doesn't get to see that. You as a police officer or SOCO would. Court usually would disregard and wouldn't mention prior offences when the case is being heard. Okay, so we've done the cost, we've done the probability and reliability, we've done the justification. Yeah, so the DNA database and the fingerprint database obviously need to be maintained and are only if the person has been arrested before. Okay, so this would be about £80 to £100 to send a swab off. Clothing is more. So sending a swab off is about £80 to £100 depending on the company you use. It's fairly cheap, but it only checks against the database. So if the person hasn't been arrested before, you don't get a result, you don't get a hit. Okay, if the person has been arrested before, lucky in our case it has, it comes back as a hit. This one would have been a direct comparison. So if, say, Molly hadn't been arrested before, or we were sending it for a direct comparison because we didn't know it would come up on the DNA database, because you have to select which test you're sending it for because it's a different process. So you would send this off for a direct comparison. So you would get Molly's blood or some DNA from Molly, usually from a hairbrush we get DNA from, because it pulls the hair out of the roots, therefore has the root intact. So a hairbrush is quite a common one, or a toothbrush because it's quite rough, gets the skin cells off from the inside of the mouth. So we would get a hairbrush or a toothbrush from Molly's house and we would compare it to the blood in the boot. That would be a direct comparison. It wouldn't include anybody else. It wouldn't go to the database, but it costs more. So a direct comparison from a toothbrush or hairbrush would probably be 200-ish. If it's an item of clothing and you're asking them to search for blood, say, that could be sort of 400, 600, 800, 1,000, depending on how long they take. It's called a search and recover. So when you send it off for DNA and you send off a jumper with blood on it, they will take it down to the lab and they will conduct a search and recover. So you can see clearly that a swab is a lot cheaper. So if you can swab blood at a scene, that is highly preferable. And if you can send it to the database, it is preferable because it's cheaper. I know cost shouldn't be involved, but it is, obviously. So for all your evaluates and justifies, cost should be a factor, especially in recent times, police having less and less funding. It is very much a factor. Some of these cases can run into tens of thousands for high profile cases, you know, and you do have to justify why you would send a swab off. If you've got 2 pieces of evidence here in-house that have been free, other than the cost of the maintenance of the database, you would have to justify, this would have to wait normally. So we would send these off first and wait for the result, and then we would send off a swab. Usually, well, in my police force that I worked for, things like this wouldn't normally be sent off straight away. Possibly the 80 quid would be. That could be sent off straight away, but normally we would wait a day or two for these two results to come back. Although the only thing in this case is these two were the scene and this was the vehicle. So you could justify sending this off straight away because it's a different scene. Okay, but cost is definitely a factor and definitely something that you need to be talking about in your evaluate and justify. Okay, I think we've covered everything. I think that should be enough for you to be working through that checklist. If you've got any questions, let me know. But hopefully that's helped you with what you need to include.